I've been struggling to figure out how to word this, because when someone asks me what my favorite genre of game is, it's hard to give a simple answer, because the answer isn't as simple as co-op game, or shooter, or whatever. The colloquial term friend slop is somewhat close, but it's not what I mean. Friend slop implies games like Lethal Company, Repo, Content Warning, and so on, and although those games do fall under this new term that I am coining, it is a much more broad term, and has a lot more things involved than just funny co-op horror game with proximity voice chat. But the best games of this genre are very different, despite the similarities with friend slop. The best way I could describe this genre of game is fellas in a situation. The key pillars of fellas in a situation are pretty self-explanatory. You and some of your friends play as a group of fellas, because we use gender-neutral pronouns here, the fellas being a bunch of nondescript, non-specific characters, and or a character creator that allows you to have characters that you can imprint yourself onto, rather than an in-universe important character with their own lore and backstory and stuff. For example, Left 4 Dead would not fall under fellas in a situation because you aren't playing as a blank avatar that represents yourself, you're playing as Nick, or Alice, or Bill. While Left 4 Dead is a great co-op game that is super fun with friends, it's not exactly what I'm talking about. An example of something that does fall under this that is not traditional friend slop is the Outlast Trials, an amazing co-op game that with the Invasions update I can now actually call a better Dead by Daylight because it has PvP now. This was a running joke in my friend group because DBD is so bad, and even though Trials is not that similar at all, you can make the joke of Trials being better DBD with it having objectives like repairing generator being actually interesting and not just holding mouse 1, as well as very in-depth chase mechanics with very satisfying movement. Side note, it's hilarious how DBD is getting worse and worse and how I was right about everything. Trials has a character creator, where you play and make as some generic dude, not any specific character like the previous Outlast games. There are a ton of unlockable clothes and outfits, and the sheriff is here to bring order to the Murkoff Trials.
Stop it.
Stop! Stop it! Leave that man alone!
No!
That was cinematic as fuck on my end.
Get up, soldier! We are leaving! That was the first pillar, the fellas, and onto the second pillar now. The second pillar is a situation, which is always a negative situation that ideally you could escape from. And you're gonna be in a negative situation if you don't subscribe and use my Epic Games code. I mean, an obvious example of a negative situation that would fall under this would be something like Lethal Company. You're stuck in this horrible contract with this evil company that always ends in your death, either from the monsters that you're forced to confront, or the unbeatable quota. So what makes fellas in a situation different than normal friend slop? Well, basically because more games fall under fellas in a situation that are not traditional friend slop co-op horror games with funny voice chat. For example, two other games that are not horror games in the traditional sense, but are fellas in a situation, are Deep Rock Galactic and Helldivers 2. In Deep Rock Galactic, you play as a bunch of dwarves that are not specific characters, just funny character creator dwarves working for a very capitalistic and evil corporation, fighting alien bugs for money. You are a bunch of fellas in a bad situation. The company of Deep Rock Galactic is so greedy, you have to pay them to get promotions. Helldivers 2 is another game where you play as a bunch of non-specific fellas in a situation. That situation being the Galactic War. You are going to die a lot. Your shitty assault rifle isn't going to do much against
Helldivers. Your fates are high. Liberty guide you.
I think you're getting a better idea of what I mean by fellas in a situation. Games like Barrel Trauma and Abiotic Factor are other great examples of this. Abiotic Factor specifically. This game is so good and is my game of the year for 2025. If you've never heard of this game, it's basically a Metroidvania survival game where you play as the scientist during the Black Mesa incident. You are a bunch of fellas with optional funny proximity voice chat in a situation, that being trapped in the facility and trying to figure a way out. I don't want to spoil too much of the game here because it's so good, so I'm not going to talk about it much more. But Abiotic Factor is one of the best indie games to come out in recent years. I very much recommend it. So by now, you should have a better idea of what makes a game fellas in a situation. And yeah, it's a very broad descriptor, but you can see what I mean and what specific appeal I'm looking for when I say fellas in a situation. Being with your friends, working to overcome a negative situation. And there are so many games that fall under this that you don't initially think of when you think of games that are similar to Lethal Company and Repo. I already said games like Outlast Trials, Helldivers 2, Deep Rock Galactic, and Abiotic Factor, but there are a ton more that fall under fellas in a situation that is very far removed from traditional friend slap. Games like Schedule 1 and even Minecraft are arguably fellas in a situation. Especially Minecraft, now that I think about it. You're playing as yourself, for lack of a better term, and you're just trying to survive in the wilderness with literally nothing, in a world where actual monsters come out from the darkness to try to kill you. You can now start to see why I made this term, because on the surface, Minecraft, Helldivers, and Repo are not similar at all, but they have this common similarity: working with friends to overcome a negative situation and come out on top. Fellas in a Situation is a type of game that I would use to describe stuff like this image. Dallas or Nick wouldn't die for $9, but Gary here would. Yeah, this is the worst class in the game, by the way. On that note, would Darktide count as fellas in a situation? The situation part is down, the rejects are in a bad situation, stuck working for the Imperium doing these impossible missions, but are the characters in Darktide characters or fellas? Because each of the 3 voices for each class has their own kind of personality and backstory, but it's also very broad, and it is a character creator game, so does it count as fellas in a situation? I wouldn't count games like Left 4 Dead or Payday, because you play as a specific character, but I would count games like Deep Rock and Helldivers, so where is the line drawn? Because Darktide is still really fun with friends, but I wouldn't really say it's fellas in a situation the same way Helldivers or Abiotic Factor is. But part of that also comes from the fact that in Darktide you are super strong. Like, you're just a guy with a sword, but you kill hundreds of enemies each mission, and your voice alone is able to make you invincible and knock down every enemy. Part of what makes fellas in a situation is the fact that I am scared for my life, and any moment I spend alive is a precious gift from the heavens above. I am praying to the Lord. I am not scared of anything in Darktide if I have voice of command. Fellas in a Situation requires the players to not be the ones in control of the situation. And when it comes to the fellas being non-specific characters, you might think it as an arbitrary requirement, like games like Left 4 Dead and COD Zombies are still great co-op experiences with friends, and you play as specific characters with their own lore and backstories instead of playing as some faceless nobody. But I feel like this distinction, as playing as an avatar for yourself instead of Ellis or Richtofen, has a very different feeling when you or one of your friends get ripped in half by a big monster. And in-game voice chat also always makes this way funnier. Hearing screams getting cut off or horrible radio filters is always funny. Forewarned is a Phasmophobia-like game, so fellas in a situation, where you explore ancient Egyptian tombs, and there are upgrades for the radio that just make the quality not as bad. The default radio sounds so horrible, and the upgrades just make it less shit. It's very funny. And there's also other funny mechanics in this game, like if you die, you can come back as a mummy to help your friends, or you can try to kill them as an evil mummy. It's very funny. Even if it's not a horror game, like Abiotic Factor, having to use in-game proximity voice chat and shitty radios just makes the game more fun. You don't really do this in games like Left 4 Dead. Even in other fellas in a situation games like Deep Rock, doesn't have this type of in-game voice, but the games that do have support for it makes it way more enjoyable with these funny limitations. And that's what really makes fellas in a situation. That's what it's all about, overcoming negative situations with friends. And the more limitations, the more fun. Being outnumbered by monsters, limited on your options to fight them, limited in communication and information, it is a great time. I remember when the Hive World update came out in Helldivers, and working together with a full squad of friends to traverse the caves was not only the hardest I ever tried in Helldivers, but it was also just so fun. We actually had to coordinate using complementary loadouts, like one person was on full crowd control duty with a ton of fire weapons, and others would use more niche things like the Halt and the Stim Pistol to actually be cooperative in the cooperative game. It was a great time. These games really do require you to have a good set of friends to play them with. Like, why would you ever play repo pubs? This is not on the script, but I just remembered that GTFO exists and is an amazing example of what I mean by fellas in a situation. It is so focused on you and your friends coordinating together in a horrible situation to make it out alive. Fantastic example of fellas in a situation. I don't know why I didn't think of that when writing the script. Anyways, back to the actual video. And you know, most of these games that fall under fellas in a situation are smaller indie games. And it's sad that bigger studios don't try to make games like this. Like, Helldivers is the only big one, and it's not even a big studio, and Helldivers has a ton of issues, especially right now. The only other big studio that I can think of that's made a fellas in a situation type game in recent years was Remedy making Firebreak, which unfortunately was a flop. I was so excited for this game. The Remedyverse is amazing, and the game was fun for a bit. It's so creative, just like everything else in the Remedyverse. The Cold War aesthetic from Control is so good, and Firebreak is responsible for my favorite callout that I have ever unironically made, which is there is a guy throwing sticky notes at the shower, which is actually an important callout, but without context or ever playing the game, you have no idea what that actually means. But unfortunately, Firebreak just has, like, no replayability, and it's also super easy. It's just unfortunate that a game in my favorite genre, in one of my favorite universes, turned out to be a total flop. This game had potential to be amazing, but it just ended up being nothing. It's sad that there aren't many games that I can think of, like Barotrauma or Abiotic Factor, these fellas in a situation games that aren't friend swap and aren't traditional co-op shooters. These games are just so fun, but they're not as popular as they deserve to be. I hope more attention can be brought to these games and this quote-unquote genre with this video, and I also want to ask you if you know of any more games like this. Despite my most playing games not being fellas in a situation, this is my favorite genre of game. It is so fun, and I want more of them to play with my friends, and I want more of these games to be made. And I want more that are more playable long-term, like Barotrauma and Abiotic Factor, and not just funny one-offs like the new Are We There Yet, which is very fun. These small indie games are good and fun, but goddammit, Abiotic Factor is just so good, and I want more games like it.